OpenAI has just launched support for Remote MCP servers in their Responses API. Model Context Protocol, or MCP, is an open protocol that standardizes how applications provide context to LLMs. By supporting MCP servers in the Responses API, we can transform this experience where the model doesn't have access to Twilio and therefore can't purchase this phone number for us into this one, where the model will be able to purchase a phone number directly for us through the Twilio MCP server. Let's see how we can deploy our own Twilio Remote MCP server to our Twilio account using Twilio Functions. This tutorial uses the Twilio CLI. If you don't already have the Twilio CLI installed, I've provided the link to the instructions on screen and in the description. On a Mac, I'll use Homebrew, but feel free to follow the guide for your OS. Once installed, you'll run Twilio login and provide your account SID and auth token to authenticate with the Twilio CLI. Next, we'll use the CLI to install the Twilio Serverless plugin, which will allow us to build Twilio Functions applications in our development environment and deploy them from the command line. Now over in our projects directory, let's use the serverless plugin to create our application based on the MCP server function template. To learn more about this function template, head to the link that's appearing on screen right now or down in the description below this video. Now let's open our project in a code editor. The only thing we need to do in here is supply some credentials in the .env file to authenticate the requests that this project will make. The first two are the account SID and auth token, which are available in the Twilio console on the dashboard. Farther down this file, you'll find fields for API key and API secret. For these, you'll need to head to the API keys section of the Twilio console and create a new key. Give it a friendly name and specify a region. Of the key types here, I would recommend either standard or restricted. For the purpose of this demo, to keep it simple, we'll be using standard, but please explore restricted for your own application since you can set the scope for that key. Now to test this locally, we can run Twilio Serverless start. We now have the Twilio MCP server running locally at localhost port 3000/MCP. Let's take a look using an inspector to see what we have available. Now back in the console, let's run npx at model context protocol/inspector to run the MCP inspector. Once it's up and running, let's take the URL that it spit out and load it up in a browser. Here we want to set the transport type to streamable HTTP and the URL to localhost port 3000/MCP. Hit connect and go over to the tools tab and hit list tools, and you'll see all of the tools that are available for the messaging service inside of our MCP server. In our URL, we can specify the query parameter services multiple times to add different services to the tools that are available. So we're going to add serverless and studio here, reconnect, head over to the clear button, and hit list tools again, and now the list of tools that are showing up is what would be available if we specified serverless and studio as the query parameters for our MCP URL. Now that we've verified that the project works locally, let's run Twilio Serverless Deploy to deploy this to Twilio Functions. Once that's done, take note of this URL because you'll need it in the next part of this tutorial when we make our requests to OpenAI's Responses API using this MCP server. All right, back in our projects folder, let's create a new directory for our MCP demo app. We'll change directory into that application and use npm to initialize a new project. We're then going to set the package type for this project to module. Then we'll use npm install to install our dependencies. We're going to need OpenAI to make OpenAI requests, Twilio to work with the Twilio helper library, and .env to work with environment variables. Now we're all set to open this project in a code editor. Let's create a .env file to store the environment variables for our project. We need the Twilio auth token and an OpenAI API key. The auth token will be used to create a Twilio signature header, and the OpenAI API key will be used to call the OpenAI API. All right, let's write some code to call the OpenAI Responses API. We're going to create a file called send_request.js. First, we're going to import some dependencies. We're using .env to work with our environment variables, Twilio to help us with a Twilio request header, inspect to help us with our console output, and OpenAI to work with the OpenAI responses API. We'll run .env.config to load in our environment variables from the .env file. Next, we'll create a constant to store the URL to our Twilio MCP server that we deployed earlier. If you remember, I told you to stash that URL. This is where we'll use it, and we'll add /mcp services equals messaging so that we get access to the messaging tools in the MCP server. This next block of code combines our URL and our Twilio auth token to generate a Twilio signature that will be passed on every request made by the MCP client. Next, we'll set up some instructions for our client. We basically need to tell it that it has access to the Twilio messaging APIs, and if we task it with creating a Twilio resource, that it should use the tools that it has available. Now it's time for everyone's favorite step, prompting. In this prompt, we are going to purchase a 267 area code phone number from Twilio, and then we'll send an SMS message to the Twilio virtual phone from this number that says, "Hello from Twilio MCP." A note on the virtual phone. We're using that because we can easily test messaging without having to worry about compliance. You can find out more about the virtual phone from the link appearing on screen right now. At this point, we have everything we need, so let's new up OpenAI and make our request. Let's break this down piece by piece. The model we're using is GPT 4.1. We're passing in the instructions and the input that we specified earlier. In the tools section, we're specifying our MCP server. The type is set to MCP, the server label is Twilio, and the server URL is the URL that we set up that has the messaging services available. For demo purposes, we've set require approval to never, which will allow the MCP server to act on our behalf without human approval. We recommend setting this to always so that you can approve every request that gets made on your Twilio account. You can find out more about how that works in the OpenAI docs. I've put the link on screen and down in the description below this video. Then for headers, we pass in that X Twilio signature that we generated earlier with our auth token and the URL. We use console.log to inspect the response and log that out to the console. All right, let's test this thing. We'll run node send_request.js and fire it off. After a few seconds, we'll get our response. The output tells us that it bought a phone number and sent an SMS. It did a bunch of things behind the scenes, and we'll take a look in the moment at all of those, but let's go verify that it did what it said it did by heading over to the Twilio console. In here, I'm going to go to phone numbers and head to manage active phone numbers to see if it created that new phone number that it mentioned. Down at the bottom of the list is our number that ends in 6461. And if I click on that and head over to messages log, I can see that a message was sent from that number to the virtual phone. Speaking of the virtual phone, let's go check that out. Under messaging, try it out, send an SMS. This is where the virtual phone lives. I'll switch to the virtual phone over on the right. And when I pick our number from the phone number list, we'll see the message that we sent to the virtual phone appear on the virtual phone. How cool. All right, if you want to really geek out, head back to your terminal and go back into your Twilio MCP server directory. Inside of here, I want you to run Twilio Serverless logs --tail. This will log out everything that's happening within Twilio functions for your account. So if we head back and make another request using our MCP client, we'll be able to see every single MCP request as it's being fulfilled. Big shout out to the team that worked on this functionality and this content. Head to the blog to read more. I've got the link on screen and down in the description. And if you want to read more about OpenAI's launch and dig into the docs, head to the blog post and doc link that I also will put in the description of this video. And hey, let us know in the comments what you'd like to see next on the channel.